There's a moment right after Loki transforms into the god of stories, where everything in the MCU seems to pause, as if the multiverse itself is waiting to hear what he'll say next. And in that silence, in that impossible cosmic stillness, Loki realizes something horrifying. The story he now sees, the grand narrative threaded through every universe, every variant, every timeline, it has a shape. And in that shape, at the point where all realities bend, twist, and converge, one name keeps appearing. Not as a threat that can be stopped, not as an obstacle that can be rewritten, but as a fixed point, a gravitational force of inevitability. Dr. Doom. And hey everyone, welcome back to MovieCast, hosted by me, Liam Harrison. Today, I'm breaking down a theory that hit me like a blast of temporal radiation. The idea that Loki's ascension wasn't the end of his journey, but the beginning of a revelation so catastrophic that even he who remains refused to voice it. Loki didn't become the god of stories to rule the multiverse. He became it because he's the only one capable of surviving the knowledge of Doom's inevitable arrival. When Loki first feels the narrative of the multiverse running through him, it's not like reading a book or watching a movie. It's closer to experiencing every storyline simultaneously while also understanding their skeletons, their foundations, their hidden machinery. And buried in that machinery is a truth so absolute that even reality-warping gods can't escape it. Doom isn't just another supervillain waiting his turn. Doom is a convergence event, something woven into the architecture of existence. In every scenario Loki examines, in every path he follows outward from the rebirth of time, Doom rises. If he is delayed in one branch, the universe collapses in on itself. If he is erased from another, the multiverse breaks into frayed threads that cannot be rewoven. It isn't that Doom wins by default, it's that Doom must appear for the story to continue. He is not destiny, not fate, he is function. A terrifying cosmic requirement. And the moment Loki sees that, he understands why even he who remains refused to let his variants exist freely. Because the moment any timeline is allowed to stretch, Doom eventually steps onto the stage. This is the core of Loki's revelation. Doom is the multiverse's pressure valve. Without him, the cycle of collapse and rebirth cannot complete. Loki sees timelines where Kang variants rise unchecked only to be annihilated by Doom. He sees universes that manage to survive long enough to avoid Kang entirely, only for them to fracture in ways only Doom's intervention can stabilize. It's almost like Doom is the multiverse's way of auto-correcting itself. Not a villain, not a savior, just an unavoidable cosmic necessity. And this horrifies Loki because he realizes something else. Even gods cannot rewrite certain fundamental elements of existence. He who remains manipulated time, pruned timelines, and reorganized reality itself just to delay Doom's arrival. And that delay cost him everything. Loki, with his new godlike awareness, understands why. If Doom enters the story too early, before the multiverse has reached the correct structural point, everything implodes. There is no timeline, no TVA, no universes left to save. Loki doesn't just see Doom as inevitable. He sees Doom as dangerous in a way that isn't tied to morality. Doom must rise, but only at the correct moment. If Loki pushes against that moment, he'll tear apart the very thing he's trying to protect. So Loki does something he has never really done before. He waits. Not out of fear, not out of indecision, and certainly not out of weakness. He waits because the story demands it. And as the god of stories, he now understands that forcing the plot forward too early ruins everything. Loki watches as events begin lining up toward the creation of Battleworld, the cosmic patchwork planet that becomes the ultimate battleground for reality itself. He sees the incursions forming, the timelines colliding, the universes cracking under the weight of inevitability. And even though every instinct in him screams to intervene, to help, to warn the Avengers or disrupt Doom's rise, Loki restrains himself. He knows that the creation of Battleworld is the point at which the multiverse becomes flexible again. Before Battleworld, everything is rigid, predetermined, locked into doom. After Battleworld, there is a chance, small, miraculous, but real, to reshape destiny. Loki has never been a patient god. But now, with infinite realities depending on his restraint, he must become one. He watches Doom rise not because he wants to, but because he must. Doom's victory is not a failure for Loki. It's a step in the story that must be honored for the next chapter to exist. As Avengers Doomsday unfolds in this theory, Loki becomes the silent witness behind everything. He is everywhere and nowhere, an observer perched between timelines, monitoring Doom's ascent with both dread and acceptance. The heroes fight, the world collapses, and Doom seizes the power he was always destined to wield. And Loki lets it happen. This isn't cowardice, it's strategy. Loki knows that the multiverse's integrity depends on Doom reaching this apex, because only at this point does reality's structure loosen enough for Loki to exert true influence. Earlier than this, any interference would trigger universal collapse, like removing scaffolding before the building has finished setting. Battleworld is the moment the story resets its own rules. A cosmic anomaly formed from destruction, held together by Doom's unmatched will. And Loki, from the farthest branches of the TVA's newly empowered archives, waits for the moment the story bends just enough for a god to slip his fingers between the pages. Doom believes he is shaping this reality. He believes he has conquered destiny itself. But Loki, for the first time, understands the profound irony. Doom is doing exactly what the story needs him to do, right before Loki begins rewriting the next chapter. Now, once Battleworld stabilizes, Loki finally steps into the story again, quietly, subtly, like a whisper entering the cracks of a collapsing universe. With the TVA under his full command, Loki gains access to something truly unprecedented. The TVA isn't just a bureaucracy anymore. It's an infinite archive of reality. Every variant timeline, every doomed branch, every cosmic anomaly has its own set of Infinity Stones. And while the TVA originally rendered those stones inert, Loki's transformation changes everything. The God of Stories doesn't just perceive narrative. He defines the context in which objects hold meaning. So when Loki reaches into a drawer of discarded Infinity Stones, they ignite in his hand, recognizing his divine narrative authority. For him, the act of gathering the stones is effortless. He doesn't need to steal them, fight for them, or even seek them out. They respond to him because he is a higher cosmological constant than they are. Each stone becomes a punctuation mark in the sentence Loki is preparing to write. And he gathers them because he knows that when Doom finally meets the Avengers on Battleworld, that moment isn't the climax of their story, it's the midpoint of his. As Avengers Secret Wars erupts into chaos, Loki remains unseen. He watches all sides collide. Heroes from collapsing universes, variants pulled from extinction, and Doom standing at the center like a self-declared god. The battle is cosmic, but Loki knows it's also symbolic. This is the moment where the multiverse asks whether Doom's rule will continue indefinitely or whether something entirely new can emerge. Doom is not merely powerful, he is the embodiment of certainty, of control, of absolute authority. His presence forces reality to conform around him. And so Loki understands that to break the cycle, he cannot merely defeat Doom. He must remove Doom from the story entirely. The Avengers fight valiantly, but they cannot topple a fixed point. Only a being who exists outside the narrative, someone who writes it, shapes it, guides its flow, can accomplish that. And so as the battle reaches its peak, Loki steps forward wearing a gauntlet shimmering with Infinity Stones from dozens of destroyed universes. He doesn't announce himself. He doesn't claim glory. In that instant, Loki simply becomes the correction the multiverse has been waiting for. Loki taking up the Infinity Gauntlet is not meant to echo Iron Man's sacrifice, though the parallel is unavoidable. Where Tony wielded the stones to protect one universe, Loki wields them to rewrite the condition of existence across every reality. The power that surges through him is unimaginable, an endless roar of creation and destruction intertwining like celestial storms. But Loki doesn't hesitate. As the god of stories, he is no longer bound by fear or ego. He channels the combined might of the stones with absolute clarity. And Doom, recognizing the threat, turns his full attention toward Loki. What follows is not a battle of punches or beams. It's a collision of fundamental principles. Doom represents inevitability, order, the necessity of his own dominance. Loki embodies possibility, change, the idea that stories evolve beyond their constraints. Their clash fractures Battleworld itself, sending ripples across universes, causing even the TVA to flicker. For the first time in his long existence, Doom senses something he has never encountered before. A being who is not playing by the rules of reality because he now writes those rules. Loki, calm even under cosmic strain, prepares the final stroke. The decisive moment arrives not as a dramatic explosion, but as a realization. Loki understands that defeating Doom isn't enough, because Doom's constant re-emergence across timelines means he cannot simply be killed, trapped, or rewritten. He must be removed from the multiverse at a foundational level. So Loki uses the Infinity Gauntlet not to destroy Doom, but to erase his narrative function, to eliminate the cosmic requirement that Doom exist. This is a level of storytelling manipulation so deep it borders on sacrilege. It's equivalent to ripping out a core mechanic of the universe and replacing it with something entirely new. Doom tries to resist, pouring all his power, rage, and arrogance into one final attempt to anchor himself. But the stones burn brighter. Reality bends around Loki's will, and the god of stories presses the universe's quill to the parchment of existence. And with a final surge, Doom isn't killed. He is unmade. His presence evaporates from all timelines, all memories, all incarnations. Even universes that once depended on his rise stabilize themselves differently, as if he had never been required at all. The story becomes free for the first time in its existence. But Loki pays the price instantly. The Infinity Gauntlet's power is overwhelming on its own, but combining it with the burden of rewriting a cosmic fixed point fractures Loki's very essence. His body begins to dissolve into golden strands of narrative energy, each thread representing a version of himself across the multiverse. And he doesn't resist. This, he always knew, was how his story would end. Not on a throne he stole or a battlefield he conquered, but in a moment where he chooses to give everything so others can continue. The TVA senses the shockwave of narrative restructuring. The multiverse shudders. New timelines blossom without fear of collapse. The Avengers look around in confusion, not fully comprehending what has just happened. To them, Doom simply vanished, as if history corrected itself. But deep within the heart of time, Loki smiles. Because for the first time since he became the god of stories, he feels the weight of Doom lifting from reality. The multiverse breathes freely again, unshackled from the inevitability of one tyrant's rise. And Loki, fading into starlit threads, embraces the ending he wrote for himself. Yet Loki's disappearance is not a tragedy, it's a transformation. His sacrifice doesn't erase him. It releases him into the very fabric of storytelling itself. He becomes the final line of the cosmic narrative he crafted. The multiverse, now reborn, no longer needs a shepherd holding its timelines together. It flows, expands, evolves with a freedom it has never experienced before. In some universes, echoes of Loki's presence ripple through myths and forgotten texts. In others, variants of him feel sudden moments of clarity as if guided by an unseen hand. The TVA adapts to this new reality, no longer policing timelines but preserving their diversity. And somewhere, beyond physical form, beyond identity, beyond even godhood, Loki continues to watch, not as a ruler, not as a guardian, but as a whisper in the story's margins. He has become something greater than a god. He is a principle, an idea, a reminder that free will can triumph over inevitability. Doom's shadow is gone, but Loki's influence remains, subtle and eternal. And the multiverse moves forward, ready to craft new stories unburdened by predetermined endings. Looking back across Loki's entire arc, from the jealous prince of Asgard to the broken variant hunted by the TVA, the irony becomes almost poetic. He spent his whole life chasing purpose, chasing glory, chasing validation from others. And in the end, he found his purpose not by claiming a throne, but by relinquishing one. The god of stories writes himself out of the story. This is perhaps the ultimate subversion of Loki's myth. For centuries, he was painted as the deceiver, the betrayer, the one who destroys. But here, at the end of all things, Loki becomes the one who liberates. He breaks the cycle of multiversal collapse. He ends the looming threat of doom. And he allows every universe to write its own destiny without a tyrant shaping its outcome. His final act isn't a trick. It isn't a scheme. It's a gift. And as I think about this theory, I can't help but feel that Marvel has been building towards something like this. A redemption arc so colossal, it reshapes the meaning of Loki's entire existence. This is the kind of ending that transforms a character not just in story, but in myth. Now, what fascinates me most about this theory is how it reframes Doom. Instead of treating him as merely a dangerous antagonist, it frames him as the multiverse's most necessary flaw, a flaw the system relies on to maintain order. In classical storytelling, myths often feature inevitable catalysts, figures whose rise sparks transformation even if they themselves are destructive. Doom fits that archetype perfectly. And Loki, in his new role, becomes the one hero capable of removing that flaw without destabilizing everything. What makes this compelling is that Doom isn't the villain Loki defeats. He's the obstacle Loki transcends. He who remains couldn't do it. Kang variants couldn't do it. The Avengers couldn't do it. But the God of stories can, because he operates outside the very logic that defines Doom's inevitability. Doom represents fixed destiny. Loki represents narrative possibility. Their clash isn't a showdown of power, it's a philosophical collision. And Loki triumphs by redefining the rules of the story itself. Doom doesn't lose because Loki is stronger. Doom loses because Loki evolves beyond the framework where Doom can exist. From a narrative perspective, Loki's long-awaited sacrifice becomes the emotional backbone of the multiverse saga. It isn't just a heroic moment. It becomes the event that allows everything after Secret Wars to exist. New universes, new characters, new beginnings. Loki doesn't save one world. He saves infinite worlds from a cycle they never understood they were trapped inside. The multiverse becomes a blank slate again, but not because it was destroyed, because the narrative constraint that shaped it is gone. Without Doom's inevitability, new outcomes flourish where previously only collapse was possible. And this is where I think Marvel would truly elevate Loki's arc. His sacrifice would be remembered not as a tragic end, but as the greatest act of creation he ever performed. Loki once wanted to be king of everything. Ironically, he becomes the liberator of everything instead. It's a shift that redefines him from villain to mythic hero, almost in the vein of ancient gods who died to bring new worlds into existence. Except here, Loki chooses it. He embraces it. And in doing so, he transcends every expectation placed upon him across decades of storytelling. What strikes me is how Loki's silence during Doom's rise becomes one of the most emotionally powerful elements of this story. Loki, who once talked his way through every situation, now operates with a level of restraint that borders on divine maturity. Watching Doom conquer the multiverse while doing nothing must be agony. Loki has lost friends, lost family, lost versions of himself, and now he must watch countless universes fall without lifting a hand. But his silence is not submission. It's discipline. It's the acceptance that some battles cannot be fought until the story reaches the proper page. That kind of patience transforms Loki from a reactive trickster into a cosmic strategist. And once Battle World forms, the moment he's been waiting for finally arrives. But the emotional weight of that waiting adds layers to his final sacrifice. Loki doesn't just die saving the multiverse. He dies after bearing witness to its suffering, holding on to the knowledge that timing, not power, is what determines the fate of everything. That level of narrative self-control elevates Loki into a figure who truly understands the cost of destiny. Another detail that gives this theory a beautiful resonance is the symbolism of the Infinity Stones. In the past, the stones represented limitation, each one tied to a fundamental aspect of the universe, each one impossibly difficult to control. They were the ceiling of power, but for Loki, they become tools, not burdens. The god of stories doesn't wield the stones to force outcomes. He uses them to align reality with the narrative he has chosen. The stones respond to him because he isn't trying to dominate the multiverse, he's trying to free it. The TVA once stripped the stones of their meaning. Loki restores that meaning by repositioning them within the cosmic story. They are no longer weapons of conquest, they are instruments of transformation. And the moment Loki slips the completed gauntlet onto his arm, the symbolism becomes clear. The god of mischief has finally mastered the forces that once defined his world. The gauntlet, which once symbolized an endgame, now becomes the pen with which Loki writes his last chapter. And Doom, for all his power, has no equivalent tool because narrative authority trumps cosmic supremacy every time. I also love the idea that Loki's final confrontation with Doom isn't physical, but conceptual. Doom throws everything at Loki: energy, willpower, temporal manipulation, but none of it ultimately matters because Loki isn't fighting within reality's rules anymore. He's fighting from outside the page. Their clash becomes a meta-conflict. Doom trying to enforce inevitability, Loki trying to inject possibility. And the Infinity Gauntlet becomes the amplifier of Loki's storytelling authority, a conduit that lets him shape existence with purpose rather than coercion. This elevates the battle beyond typical Marvel spectacle. It becomes a moment where philosophy, mythology, and cosmic physics merge into something profound. Loki isn't trying to win, he's trying to end a cycle. Doom isn't trying to survive, he's trying to maintain the narrative architecture that validates his existence. And when Loki's final stroke erases Doom's narrative necessity, it isn't a victory. It's a liberation. The multiverse doesn't cheer. It exhales, relieved to finally step out from under a shadow it never consciously knew existed. The emotional weight of Loki's sacrifice becomes even heavier when you consider what he leaves behind. A multiverse that no longer needs him. A TVA that can now operate without fear or authoritarian control. A narrative structure that no longer relies on one man's inevitable arrival to reset itself. Loki's absence becomes the foundation of this new era. And what's tragic, yet beautiful, is that almost no one knows what he did. The Avengers don't witness his sacrifice the way they did Tony's. The universe doesn't chant his name. The multiverse simply continues, oblivious but thriving. And that anonymity is what makes his act more pure than anything Loki has ever done. He saves existence without the reward of recognition, without applause, without even the satisfaction of being remembered. In a poetic way, this anonymity completes his redemption. Loki once wanted to be worshipped. Now he becomes the silent guardian of stories. a presence felt but never seen. His legacy is not carved into monuments, it is written into the structure of reality itself. One of the most beautiful consequences of Loki's sacrifice is the rebirth of the multiverse in a state of pure possibility. Without doom as a fixed point, universes that once collapsed now flourish. Variants once doomed to die now survive. Stories that once ended prematurely now continue. Loki doesn't just save lives. He restores the right for every being to choose their own path. This becomes the philosophical core of the post-Secret Wars MCU. Freedom replaces determinism. Creativity replaces repetition. And Loki becomes the unseen architect of that freedom. Even if characters don't know what he did, the spirit of his sacrifice influences everything. Heroes act without fear of narrative collapse. Villains rise without cosmic predestination. Worlds evolve on their own terms. It's the ultimate gift from the god of stories, a story no longer bound by inevitability. And this, to me, would position Loki as one of the most important characters in the entire MCU, someone who redefined not just a universe, but the very nature of storytelling within it. As I reflect on this theory, what stands out most is how it reframes Loki's identity. He began as a character obsessed with his own story, how he appeared to others, how much power he held, how grand his legend could be. But by the end, Loki lets go of all of that. He becomes a servant of a greater narrative, not its ruler. His final act is not about shaping how others see him, but about shaping how others can live. In other words, Loki becomes the opposite of Doom. Doom imposes fate on the multiverse so he can rule it. Loki dissolves fate so the multiverse can be free. This symmetry gives their conflict emotional and philosophical resonance that goes far beyond a typical hero versus villain dynamic. Loki becomes the answer to Doom, not by countering his power, but by transcending the need for power at all. He writes himself out of the story so others can write themselves into it. That's not just heroism. That's myth-making. And that brings us to the final, most poetic idea of this entire theory. Loki doesn't die. Not truly. He simply transforms into the narrative force that guides the multiverse forward. His body may vanish, his name may fade, but his presence remains woven into the story of existence. Every moment of unexpected hope, every improbable victory, every twist of fate that saves a universe when all seems lost, that's Loki. Not as a trickster, not as a god, but as the embodiment of possibility. He becomes the multiverse's guardian angel, operating not from a throne, but from the margins of the story's script. And maybe, one day, if the narrative ever needs him again, a spark of golden light will flicker across the branches of Yggdrasil, and Loki will step back into the tale he once sacrificed everything to protect. But for now, his story ends exactly where it should, with a choice, a sacrifice, and a legacy that stretches across infinite realities. Loki becomes the final line of a cosmic epic only he could write. Have you ever felt like the foundational rules of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's multiverse change with every single movie or television show that gets released? It can be incredibly frustrating as a dedicated viewer when one project establishes a strict set of rules only for the very next story to seemingly throw those established laws out the window, leaving us drowning in what looks like an endless sea of plot holes and glaring continuity errors. We have spent the last few years desperately trying to piece together a massive, mind-bending puzzle where the pieces do not seem to fit naturally. But if we take a step back, take a deep breath, and look at the entire multiverse saga as one giant interconnected tapestry, a hidden truth starts to emerge from the chaos. There is a singular, underlying secret that actually makes everything we have seen crystal clear. This hidden reality not only perfectly explains the endless multiversal war between the countless terrifying variants of Kang the Conqueror, but it also flawlessly sets the stage for the grim future. It gives us the exact, undeniable motive for Dr. Doom as we head straight into the cinematic events of Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars. It changes absolutely everything we thought we knew. And to truly understand this massive shift in perspective, we have to go back to the very beginning of the concept and fix a fundamental misunderstanding that has plagued the fandom for years. The biggest mistake we make as viewers, and sometimes even what the movies mislead us to believe, is confusing dimensions with actual alternate universes. Think back to the very first Doctor Strange movie, where the Ancient One sent Stephen on that wild, mind-bending magical mystery tour through the fabric of reality. We heard the word multiverse spoken for the very first time on screen, and we were shown these terrifying, kaleidoscopic, abstract places like the Dark Dimension where Dormammu resides. Later on in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we were introduced to deeply mystical planes of existence, like Ta Lo in Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, and of course, the incredibly bizarre, microscopic world of the quantum realm in the Ant-Man films. For the longest time, the community naturally assumed these were all different universes entirely, but they are not. They are entirely different structural concepts. To put it simply and clearly, imagine a single universe is a massive, sprawling mansion. The physical reality where our heroes live, like Earth 616, is just the main living room. The Dark Dimension, Ta Lo, and the Quantum Realm are just different rooms inside that exact same house. They are completely bound to that specific universe, and they do not exist outside of its walls. This means that every single alternate universe out there in the wider cosmos has its very own dark dimension and its very own quantum realm, safely contained within its own unique boundaries. This critical distinction between a dimension and a universe is absolutely crucial because it completely redefines the scale of what our beloved heroes have been dealing with all this time. When Scott Lang got trapped in the quantum realm, he was not wandering around in another universe. He was just lost in the deepest, most inaccessible, microscopic basement of his own home, Universe 616. Understanding this fundamental concept allows us to strip away the unnecessary confusion and look at the actual fabric of reality with fresh eyes. A true universe is a self-contained, protective bubble of existence, complete with all of its internal dimensional layers acting as its organs. It is a complete functioning package. So when we talk about the multiverse eventually breaking or shattering, we are not talking about these internal dimensions suddenly bleeding into one another. We are talking about these massive, self-contained bubbles of existence actively colliding. But before we can even get to the grand, terrifying scale of colliding universes, we have to add another incredibly complex layer to this cosmic cake. And that brings us to the absolute headache that is time travel and the creation of splintering timelines. The rules of time travel were laid out pretty definitively by the Ancient One and Bruce Banner, yet somehow the fandom and even some of the subsequent writers seem to completely muddy the waters. Let us really unpack what actually happened structurally during the time heist in Avengers Endgame. The rule presented to us was clear and absolute. If you travel back into your own past and change something, you do not alter your own personal future. Instead, that specific point of change splinters off and creates a brand new, wildly unpredictable branching timeline. It is exactly like a giant oak tree suddenly growing a new aggressive branch from its main trunk. But here is the monumental detail that everyone seems to overlook, a detail that is the absolute foundational key to this entire theory. A splintered timeline does not magically become a brand new independent universe. It just does not work that way from a cosmic physics standpoint. That new branch, no matter how wildly different its future becomes because of the changes made, still shares the exact same origin point in history. It shares the exact same Big Bang as the original timeline it just branched off from. Because they share that fundamental cosmic birth, they are inherently and permanently tied together. They are part of the exact same universal system, breathing the same cosmic air. They are just alternate parallel paths contained securely within the same overarching universe. This is a massive, game-changing distinction that completely redefines how we view the desperate actions of the Time Variance Authority and the ultimate stakes of the entire multiverse. We recently saw the ultimate, undeniable proof of this exact concept playing out on the big screen in Deadpool and Wolverine. That movie brilliantly showed us the mechanics of a core timeline and its surrounding, sprawling branches. We learned through the heartbreaking exposition that when a specific universe begins to physically die or decay, perhaps due to the tragic loss of a foundational anchor being all of those branching timelines that sprouted from its history begin to wither, rot, and die as well. They are intrinsically, fatally linked to the health and survival of their parent universe. If a branch were a truly independent, brand new universe, it would easily survive the death of the timeline it branched from. It would just float away. But it does not. They all burn and fade into the void together. So, if alternate dimensions are just various rooms inside a house, and branching timelines are just different, parallel paths contained within the same universe, then what in the world is the actual multiverse? This is where the theory takes a massive, terrifying leap, stepping away from the microscopic rules and looking at the absolute grand design of Marvel's cosmic creation. The true awe-inspiring multiverse is not made of flimsy branches. It is made of completely independent, massive, stacked universes, each with its own unique Big Bang, its own distinct cosmic origin, and its own completely separate set of physical laws, histories, and heroes. Imagine an endless, unfathomable void, a dark expanse of absolute nothingness stretching into infinity. Within that terrifying void float countless massive shimmering bubbles, each one representing a completely unique, stacked universe. Inside each of these bubbles is a main timeline, all of its chaotic branching possibilities, and all of its internal, hidden dimensions like the quantum realm and the dark dimension. These are the stacked universes, existing completely oblivious to one another under normal, peaceful circumstances. The Fox X-Men universe, with its own rich history of mutants, is one giant bubble. The Sony Spider-Man universe, where Venom and Morbius roam, is another entirely separate bubble. Earth 616, the cinematic universe we have followed for over a decade, is yet another. They were not created by someone traveling back in time and accidentally changing a minor detail, like dropping a coffee cup. They have existed since the literal dawn of creation, entirely separate from one another in the grand void. But here is the massive, unavoidable problem, and this is where the cosmic horror of the Marvel Cinematic Universe truly begins to rear its ugly head. Remember those branching timelines we just talked about? The ones that grow out of a universe's main timeline whenever a choice is made or time is unnaturally altered. Under normal circumstances, they are harmless variations. But if a universe produces too many branches, and those branches are allowed to grow wildly without being trimmed, the sheer mass and volume of that universe begins to aggressively expand outward. It physically swells and bloats within the empty void. As this chaotic, bloated universe expands uncontrollably, its sprawling, wild branches begin to physically push against the invisible boundaries of the neighboring stacked universes floating nearby. The bubbles start to violently press against each other. And when they finally touch, when the wild, overgrown branches of one universe pierce the fragile shell of another, we get the most catastrophic, apocalyptic event in all of Marvel lore. We get a multiversal incursion. This is the true, terrifying definition of an incursion. It is not just a magical portal opening in the sky, it is the physical, grinding collision of two entirely separate realities occupying the same space. The cosmic friction of this collision completely destroys the boundaries of reality, leading to the absolute, inescapable annihilation of one or both of the colliding universes. Suddenly, the retro-futuristic screens at the Time Variance Authority make perfect, terrifying sense. Remember the glowing red line they were constantly monitoring with absolute dread? We all assumed crossing that red line meant a timeline branch was simply becoming permanent and unchangeable. But that never really made sense. The truth is far darker and carries much heavier stakes. That red line on the TVA monitors actually represents the physical outer boundary of Universe 616. If a growing branch crosses that red line, it means it has grown so far out into the void that it is about to physically touch a neighboring stacked universe and trigger an immediate universe-ending incursion. This terrifying, apocalyptic reality completely recontextualizes everything we thought we knew about the mysterious man pulling the strings from the shadows at the end of time. When we finally met He Who Remains in his crumbling citadel at the end of time, he told Loki and Sylvie a terrifying story of a great multiversal war between his countless variants. But his ultimate solution to this war was heavily misunderstood by the audience. He Who Remains did not just conquer time for the sake of power. He weaponized the flow of time as a massive cosmic shield. He realized through endless trial and error that the only way to protect his specific universe, Universe 616, from the wrath of his bloodthirsty alternate selves and the constant threat of catastrophic incursions was absolute, ruthless, and total isolation. So, he took the main timeline of 616 and tightly bundled all of its parallel, acceptable branches into a single, cohesive, unbreakable rope. He aggressively called this tightly wound rope the sacred timeline. It was never a single, lonely path through history. It was a carefully curated, heavily policed collection of timelines that moved in the exact same general direction without ever being allowed to branch outward. By aggressively pruning any branch that dared to grow toward the outer edges of their universal bubble, he effectively hid Universe 616 from the rest of the stacked multiverse. He put his entire universe in an impenetrable stealth mode. As long as the sacred timeline remained perfectly trimmed and completely contained within its designated boundaries, the other massive universes floating in the void could not see it, could not touch it, and most importantly, could not invade it. He Who Remains was essentially acting as a cosmic, psychopathic gardener, ruthlessly cutting away trillions of lives just to ensure nothing could draw attention to their hidden existence. This grand revelation makes the emotional finale of Loki's season one hit so much harder than before. When Sylvie let her anger consume her, plunging her blade into the heart of He Who Remains, and Loki subsequently took his place on the throne, a massive misconception was born among the fanbase. People mistakenly assumed that Loki's actions somehow retroactively created the multiverse, magically conjuring the Fox X-Men and the Sony Spider-Man worlds out of thin air. But that is completely and fundamentally wrong based on the rules we just established. Those stacked universes were always there, floating silently in the void, living out their own completely separate, rich histories. What the death of He Who Remains actually accomplished was the immediate destruction of the cosmic stealth field. Without the TVA relentlessly pruning the expanding branches, Universe 616 instantly blossomed. Its branches sprawling out violently in every direction, aggressively reconnecting with the wider pre-existing multiverse. The camouflage was gone, and the previously isolated universe was suddenly, violently thrust back onto the grand, dangerous cosmic stage. This sudden, explosive reconnection of reality sets the perfect stage for one of the biggest, most mind-bending twists of this entire theory, taking us straight to the bizarre, highly debated post-credit scene of Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. We all watched as the Council of Kangs gathered in a massive roaring stadium. They were actively celebrating the death of someone they called the Exiled One. Now, almost everyone watching naturally assumed they were talking about the specific Kang the Conqueror who had just been seemingly defeated by Scott Lang and Hope Van Dyne inside the shrinking core of the quantum realm. But if you look closely at the chronological timeline of multiversal events and the sheer underlying panic in the Council's demeanor, a completely different, utterly shocking truth reveals itself. They were not talking about the Kang who lost a fistfight to Ant-Man. They were explicitly talking about the death of He Who Remains. The Council suddenly realized that the master architect of the sacred timeline was dead, and that Universe 616 had just dropped its impenetrable shields, rapidly re-entering the multiversal ecosystem. They were not throwing a party over a victory against a rogue variant. They were reacting to the sudden, glaring reappearance of the most dangerous universe in existence, frantically plotting their massive invasion before a new unseen power could rise to take the throne. But the rabbit hole of this theory goes even deeper, tying the narrative threads together in a way that is incredibly satisfying. Prepare yourself, because this is where the theory weaves everything into a perfect, tragic, self-fulfilling loop of destiny. The deeply aggressive Kang we met in Quantumania, the ruthless conqueror trapped and stewing in the quantum realm, and the weary, eccentric, apple-eating He Who Remains waiting at the Citadel at the end of time are not two different variants at all. They are the exact same person at vastly different points in a cosmic, predestined cycle of suffering and control. Think about the logistics of it. The Council of Kangs feared the Quantumania variant so much that they explicitly refused to kill him, instead exiling him to a place entirely outside of normal space and time. But by trapping him in the quantum realm and ultimately forcing him to be violently sucked into his own malfunctioning multiversal engine core, they inadvertently gave him exactly what he needed to win. That chaotic, swirling vortex of infinite probability did not kill him. It evolved him beyond comprehension. It spat him out at the very end of time itself, perfectly equipped with the unfathomable knowledge and the sheer, unbroken will to look back at the chaotic multiverse, permanently isolate Universe 616, found the time variance authority from scratch, and eventually become He Who Remains. It is a flawless, unbreakable, closed-loop paradox. The Council created their own greatest nightmare by trying to avoid it. But as absolutely fascinating and tragic as the story of Kang the Conqueror is, that specific chapter of the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been abruptly and definitively closed. The catastrophic multiversal war he spent eons trying to prevent and ultimately caused through his own hubris has completely shattered the delicate mathematical balance of reality. 616 is now dangerously exposed. Its overgrown branches are aggressively tangling with neighboring hostile realities. And the terrifying world-ending threat of incursions is becoming an everyday reality for our heroes. The entire multiverse is actively bleeding out, desperately crying out for a savior, or perhaps more accurately, an absolute unyielding dictator to forcefully impose order upon the sprawling chaos. Nature absolutely abhors a vacuum, and with he who remains dead and the Council of Kangs destined to fail in their disorganized invasion, a massive echoing void of absolute power has opened up at the very top of the cosmic food chain. This is the exact moment, the perfect, unavoidable storm of apocalyptic conditions that perfectly paves the way for the arrival of the most formidable, intelligent, and ruthless villain in Marvel history. The stage is perfectly set for Victor Von Doom. Doom does not care about conquering timelines for the sake of petty ego like Kang did. Doom looks at the fractured, bleeding multiverse and sees gross incompetence. He sees a fundamentally flawed, chaotic system that desperately needs a master architect to tear it down to its foundations and rebuild it perfectly in his own image. To achieve his ultimate terrifying goal of forging a perfect singular reality under his total, unwavering control. A patchwork reality we all know from the comics as Battle World Doctor Doom cannot just rely on his mastery of magic or his advanced, futuristic technology. He needs the ultimate raw power over the very fabric of existence itself. And right now, in the current landscape of the MCU, that unimaginable power is not floating in a random void or hidden inside a glowing quantum core. That power is physically sitting on a lonely throne at the end of time, grasping the infinite glowing branches of the multiverse with his bare hands. Doom knows that to reshape all of reality, he must take absolute control of the world tree. He must violently strip the multiversal reins away from the god of stories himself. The entire overarching narrative of Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars is not going to be a standard CGI-heavy random slugfest. It is going to be a deeply philosophical, incredibly brutal, and highly tactical chess match between the unmatched intellect of Victor Von Doom and the emotional resilience of Loki. Doom must find a brilliant, devastating way to reach the absolute center of the multiverse, completely break Loki's magical grip on the branches, and siphon that unfathomable temporal power for his own twisted purpose. It is a monumental battle of literal gods, a massive clash of ideologies between Loki's newfound desire to protect free will and Doom's dark obsession with absolute suffocating control. And it all fundamentally stems from the complex mechanics of stacked universes, branching timelines, and the terrifying reality of incursions. The entire Marvel multiverse saga, despite its apparent flaws and confusing detours, has been meticulously leading up to this one catastrophic, universe-shattering transfer of power. And when you finally connect all the seemingly disparate dots, the frustrating plot holes completely vanish, transforming into a beautifully tragic, epic cinematic tapestry. But I want to know exactly what you think about all of this deep lore analysis. Do you truly believe Dr. Doom has the sheer intellect and power to dethrone the god of stories and forge Battleworld from the dying ashes of these colliding universes? Or is there another massive hidden piece to this cosmic puzzle that we have completely missed in our breakdown? Drop your wildest theories, your counter-arguments, and your burning questions down in the comments section below, because I absolutely love reading through your brilliant ideas. If this massive deep dive blew your mind and finally helped make sense of the multiverse madness we have been living through, please be sure to smash that like button, share this video with your fellow confused Marvel fans, and hit subscribe so you never miss out on our future cinematic breakdowns. Thank you all so much for sticking with me to the very end of this incredibly long and twisty journey. I am your host, Liam Harrison from MovieCast, reminding you that in a sprawling multiverse of absolutely infinite possibilities, the single most dangerous thing you can possibly do is underestimate the sheer will of Doctor Doom. I will catch you in the next one.